Hello and welcome to Udaiti Dialogues on Women and Economic Growth, a forum where we explore insights at the intersection of women, work, and growth through conversations with leaders from business and government about what inclusive economic growth looks like as India progresses towards becoming Viksit Bharat. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome someone who I promise all of you know, whose voice you'd recognize from a mile away. She can get the most powerful CEOs in India and world to sit up a little straighter and get them to answer with honesty and accountability. From the young Turks behind our startup ecosystem to global leaders, she's interviewed them all, broken the stories that move markets, and set the gold standard for journalistic rigor in her own inimitable style. Usually, she's the one holding the microphone, but today, I'm so excited to have her in the hot seat for Udaiti Dialogues, and also a little nervous. Please welcome Shereen Bhan, Managing Editor of CNBC TV18, one of India's most respected business journalists. She's moderated high-stakes conversations for nearly 2.5 decades and been the voice bringing India's economic narrative to us. I'll be honest, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, not just because of how wonderful Shereen is, which of course she is, but also because of what she represents. A leader who built her own seat at the table and then used it to make space for stories that needed to be told. Shereen, thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. We've been trying to do this for a while, and I'm glad that we finally have been able to sit down and have this conversation. And it's been so wonderful to partner with you and Udaiti through the course of the last few years in all that we've done. So I'm really glad that we're taking that forward this year as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Shereen. Shereen, before we get into your work from Young Turks to Future Female Forward and your remarkable career, I want to start with Shereen off the camera. What is she like? What does she enjoy? What are the energizers and de-energizers? And how do you keep yourself calm in the middle of all this chaos?
So can I give you a slightly long, complex answer?
Of course.
Because I think that will help explain, where I'm coming from. But also, I think it's a moment of reflection for me. So this, I go back to about 2012, and this was a response to a physical symptom. And I was looking for answers, and I said, look, I don't want to go down the path of medication and so on and so forth. And I said, I met, who's now my mentor, my homeopath, Dr. Rajan Sankaran. And through that process of assessing what my physical symptoms were telling me, I started to analyze my behavior pattern. I started to analyze my physical response to emotional things. And that was the start of a process of self-discovery and self-awareness in many ways. And I would say in the last 15 odd years, I've, started to recognize my comfort zone, quote unquote, because, those are the patterns that we tend to fall back on. I've also started to understand why I respond to certain things in a certain way, why I react to certain things, and response and reactions are two entirely different things altogether. So it's been interesting. So I would say that through this process of self-discovery and self-awareness, I'm as close to the mollusk family as possible. So which means I'm pretty self-reliant, I'm malleable, I'm soft, I'm adaptable, but I also have the tendency of going into my shell when it is necessary, especially for self-preservation and protection. So I do have that tendency. So when I'm on camera, you will see this side of me, which is, everyone assumes that I'm this sort of very vivacious, outgoing extrovert. I'm actually quite the opposite when I'm off camera. I'm much more reflective. I'm much more self-contained. I don't like large crowds. I don't like being in spaces which are happening. I prefer smaller gatherings and smaller groups of friends. And I'm very connection oriented. For me, that is what drives me. That's what's important. I don't really suffer from too much FOMO, so I have no sort of aspiration of wanting to be in a certain place that everybody else is at, and I think that's kind of helped me through the course of my journey as well. So I'm malleable, I'm adaptable, I'm very low maintenance and very low fuss, and to the point about staying calm, I think I've also realized that there's only so much that you can control. You can only influence your reaction. You can only influence your response. You cannot control what somebody else may do or say. And so I think that has also been a process of trying to tailor your response to the world, and I think that helps you stay calm. And of course, I hang upside down over the weekend, so that helps me stay centered. And that's a big part of my de-stress mechanism, as well as my way of trying to energize myself.
Wow. Wow. How long have you been doing yoga? And that's a very special yoga that you do, right?
It is. I mean, I was not actually my initiation into the world of any kind of physical activity. I've not been a sports person through school or college or any of that. I was much more the arts and creative sort. So this happened very, late in life. And it happened by accident. It was a colleague of mine who said that she had this pass from a fitness app, and they were doing these classes, and she didn't want to go, and she offered it to people in the newsroom, and I have no idea why. I raised my hand and I said, give it to me, I'll go. And then I went and I fell in love with it, and there's been no looking back. So it's been about 2018, 2019. But then COVID happened and we took a break, and then we sort of resumed. But the last, I would say, 7-8 years has been this sort of journey of trying to really fall in love with the fact that today I just feel like mobility gives you, it doesn't just energize you, it is a mechanism of de-stressing yourself. It's a mechanism of sort of staying centered, staying grounded. I walk a lot. In a day, I do at least 15 to 20,000 steps if I can. You'll see me like this dervish in the newsroom. I don't sit at all. But that really is my way of coping with all the stresses. And we are in a pretty much like a pressure cooker environment. So that's the gasket release, if you will, for me.
Absolutely. And it's so ironical, right? With all of this information that's around us now, it's become harder to know yourself and to know what triggers you and some of the emotions that can then impact your health. My husband had this back pain, which he tried to solve for through all sorts of tests, all sorts of physiotherapy, and there was a book that he discovered called Healing Back Pain, and this doctor said basically it is in the mind, and he's treated so many people like that. And that somehow seemed to work for my husband too. And since then, I've referred it to so many people. But there is such a huge mind-body connection.
Absolutely. I think, we've gotten so used to treating symptoms,
Yes.
right? Not just physically, but even around us. Our response to things is not to understand the cause, but it is to understand, okay, this seems to be the triggering factor, and address that and try and sort of resolve that. So it is very superficial. It's at the upper layer. But I think really understanding how the mind and body works, what influences what aspect of your emotional well-being, your physical well-being. I think when you start to look at all of that holistically, I think you find perhaps deeper answers and perhaps more sustainable answers as well. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're symptom obsessed, and cure has been looked at from that prism entirely. And I think that's the mistake that we often end up making.
Absolutely. Shereen, as I was doing research for this conversation, I know you are from the armed forces background, and your parents were quite egalitarian as they brought up you and your sister. So I'm curious to know if there was a turning point when you realized that as a woman, you were navigating your career slightly differently. You were making different kinds of choices. And I'll tell you where I'm coming from. I personally was gender blind for a very large part of my life. And my general response was nobody's sitting there discriminating against you. If you hit challenges, you just work harder and smarter and things will fall in place. But over a period of time, that perspective shifted. I wonder what that journey was like for you.
No, you're absolutely right, Pooja, that, growing up, I didn't have to face the challenges that many women have to face. We didn't have to deal with my parents telling me that, this is a choice that you need to make, or this is a choice you cannot make. We were allowed to do whatever we wanted to do. And it was also interesting that we were never brought up to think that careers were not important for us. We were always brought up to think that we had to be financially independent, that we had to be self-sufficient, we had to be self-reliant. And so that's the world that I grew up in. But, there were two significant points that I think got me to start to think differently. One was when I was at a conference and, we were talking about discrimination in the newsroom and leadership challenges and so on and so forth. And, unconsciously, I was narrating my own experience, and I said, like, I don't believe that there is that kind of discrimination in the television news space, because it's a sunrise sector, it's a fairly new sector, and, the newsroom is pretty democratic and so on and so forth. And there was a young girl who stood up in the audience and she said, that's not my experience. And she was speaking from a place of being part of a newsroom that was not an English-speaking newsroom. And she said, my experience is very different. And that forced me to recognize the fact that, look, I cannot assume that my experience is the general norm for most women. In fact, I'm the aberration, I'm the exception.
Yeah.
And that got me to start to recognize the need to have these conversations. And that's when we started a show called What Women Really Want. And then, of course, that led eventually to Future Female Forward. And then the other thing that I started to, to notice was that invariably in rooms, where decisions were actually being made, I was perhaps the only woman, whether it was internal or external. And that got me to realize that, look, while, I may have had opportunities, I may have made my own choices, but culturally there was a problem. Culturally, women were looked at from a lens of being good at execution, but being kept out of the roles that required decision making. And we had a offsite. I remember this very clearly. It was an offsite that we had at TV18, and we were in Macau. And I raised this issue, in the presence of the top leadership. And so that's when I really started to challenge the idea that it was an equal opportunity environment that women operated in, because that is not necessarily the case. And which is why I think it continues to be important for us to have these conversations, because there are those conscious and unconscious biases that continue to exist. And, we've seen regulation change, and we've seen what regulation has done to change the needle. For instance, we've talked about this previously as well. Before the mandatory need to bring women directors on board, we just didn't have any.
Yeah.
And it's not like they didn't exist.
Yeah.
The minute you said we mandate by law that you need to have a certain number of women directors on board, companies started to comply with that regulation.
Right.
And again, so I'm saying sometimes this carrot and stick approach is needed. Even on the issue of reservation, for instance, and I know not just me, but many women have had this dilemma of saying, should we be pro-reservation or not? Because if we're pro-reservation, then what's the message that we're sending out?
Yes.
Then, will we be seen as reservation quota candidates?
Yeah.
But I think that at a certain point, in a certain context, it is important for us to bring in measures, to promote steps that actually turn the needle. So today I feel like there is need for policy intervention. There is need for the government, for the regulator to push the needle, because otherwise we're just not seeing change, and it's slow, and we need to make a difference. So these are some of the sort of conversations and some of the moments over the course of the last 10 years that really shaped the manner in which I started looking at this whole piece around gender.
How far back was this, Shereen, when you said this girl stood up in the audience?
This was, we started What Women Really Want, I would say more than 15 years ago. So yes, it's been a long
15
journey.
years. And
over
do you
15
think things
years.
have changed for the better, for worse?
I think they have in many ways. I think at least there is an acknowledgement of the problem. And I think some companies have decided to address it. Let's bring up the example of the Supreme Court judgment on whether you should mandate menstrual leave or not. Now, I know many women believe that this was a cop-out and that the Supreme Court should have said, yes, many women suffer from debilitating cramps every month, and so it's only fair that they be given menstrual leave by law. But on the other side, and this is based on the conversations that I've had with people in the workforce, sometimes well-intentioned policies, in fact, have the opposite effect. And many people have said that, especially for smaller organizations, they will then start to retreat from even looking at hiring women to start with. And again, I believe that these are cultural issues that need to be addressed within organizations, that you should be able to have a conversation to say, I go through a difficult period, and so can I take time off? And you shouldn't be frowned upon, and you shouldn't be looked down upon. So I think the challenge that leadership faces today is, without hard coding these decisions, how do you create a culture that is empathetic? How do you create a culture that's supportive? How do you create a culture that's nurturing, not just of women, but also of men? And how do you really create that equal opportunity workplace? Because we have to also recognize the fact that women, as they enter the workforce, are entering with one hand tied behind their back, especially in India. That is a fact. That is a reality that we have to acknowledge. Whether it is maternal care, it is geriatric care, it is the home, environment.
Safety?
Women are responsible. Women are responsible for a large part of those chores that require human supervision. You cannot outsource them to AI as of today, and it's the women who are doing that. So that's a recognition that must be acknowledged. It is one hand tied behind the back. So for all the stuff that I keep hearing, oh, you want equal opportunity, but yet you want these special privileges, and yet you want these special days off, and so on and so forth. Those are not privileges. Those are not, you're not doing me as a woman a favor by giving me maternity leave. If you want women to go through childbirth, then you need to create an enabling environment for the woman to be able to exercise other choices as well. The lone choice of a woman should not be to have a child and give up on every other aspiration in life. So I think we need to reframe these conversations as, what can we do to enable the well-being of women as whole beings, not just as mothers or wives or daughters or career women, but as whole beings. Why do we not ask these questions, when it comes to men? And I think that's where I hope that, we're taking the conversation. And that's really been a large part of the foundation of the work that we've attempted to do through content on CNBC.
You brought up policy, right? And that's such a double-edged sword. Like you said, there have been so many well-intentioned policies that have actually led to ill consequences when implemented, right? So on the menstrual leave, I've been talking to some of the business leaders who have operations, companies who have operations in different states. Now, if that gets, if a policy is put in place, a company that has operations in 5 different states and 5 different states implemented differently, the reaction of the company will be to not hire women. And it is going to lead to challenges. On the other hand, when you look at the mandatory woman independent director on boards, that is the only number in corporate India that has gone up over the last 5 to 8 years. Through our Close the Gender Gap Data Hub, when we look at number of women at the workforce level, number of women in key management positions and boards, at the workforce level, that is still 18%. In the largest of enterprises, in key management positions, it's actually gone down a little bit to about 17%. it's only women on boards that have gone up to 22%,
Yeah.
and that also still 22%.
Yeah.
So a lot needs to be done.
Yes.
And I always, I always wonder about what is that number where the positive flywheel will start to move. Like you said, no, why do, on the one hand you want equality, but on the other hand you're also looking at all of these things. I think there is a minimum threshold when you get to that critical mass, when the positive flywheel begins to move. There are enough role models in different areas. There are, gender norms begin to shift. And somehow I believe in the power of 3. That 1/3 number is a magical number.
Yeah.
So getting to that possibly will get that flywheel moving. And like you said, Shereen, a lot of the framing for women's inclusion has been around its cascading impact on societies, families, countries. It's like it's a moral imperative. It's a good thing to do. It's good for women, good for everyone. How do you actually make a business case for it? That it's more than that. Like,
but I think, Pooja, the fact that it has been framed as it's good for growth has actually somehow made it much more marketable, has made it much more sellable. Okay,
Right.
so it's like in the CEOs that you talk to who would be looking at this as an issue will then be able to say, oh, okay, this is the smart business thing to do, and I've heard this so often. So I think linking it to growth and to say that, oh, you do better by hiring more women, it's better for growth, it's better for consumption, it's better for us as a society, and so on and so forth. I think the growth argument has made it much more marketable and much more sellable as an idea. I don't think people are still framing it as it's good for women. You know, it's good for half the population of this country to be able to live the lives that they want, is to freely make the choices that they want. So, I mean, I'm not going to argue with it. I'm not going to quibble with the framing of it as long as it moves the needle. But I think it has made it easier.
That's right.
I think it's made it easier to have these conversations in the boardroom, to say, oh, look, the data is telling us that, it's good for business if you have so many women as part of the workforce. And so if that's being used to actually bring more women on board, I'm all for it. But it's the easier sell, I think, to link this and frame it in the way that, more women means better growth or more growth.
Yeah. You've sat across some of the most powerful CEOs and policymakers. What happens when the cameras are not rolling? So when they are on the camera in front of people, you are saying that they're important for growth. But when it comes to actually shifting it on the ground, it's difficult work. Do you think there are leaders who are really committed to it and wanting to move the needle? And what is that percentage looking like?
Well, I would say that I have seen a difference in the last few years between intention and action. And I think there is a convergence between what people say they want to do and what people are actually doing, which is positive.
Right.
And I'll give you an example. I mean, a lot of CEOs that we now speak to are saying that, look, we do want to get more women on board, but it's going to now, let's address it by way of HR policies. Let's address this in terms of logistics and, creches and transportation and having conversations even with parents and so on and so forth. Let's expand the pool of people that we hire from. Let's go into colleges. Let's bring in more women at the selection stage. So I think there is, at least in many companies, now a stated objective to look at hiring or bringing more women on board.
Right.
And we're seeing it. The good news is that you're seeing it in manufacturing companies as well. And many manufacturing companies have, some have in fact said that they're looking at setting up women-only facilities and so on and so forth. And many have, like Nestle, etc., have gone down that road. Companies like Mahindra, for instance, Bajaj Auto, for instance, they have got women on the shop floor. So I think there is a change that's happening. But as you pointed out, the data tells you a different story, right?
Yeah.
That there is a lot more that needs to be done to actually bridge the gap, to actually get that convergence at a larger scale. But I'm hopeful that because this is a conversation that CEOs are having, that CEOs are continuing to sort of focus on, that we will get, and I think it is a generational issue as well. I mean, this, the change will happen perhaps over a generation as well. So I'm hopeful that we will start to see meaningful results. But you just have to keep having the conversation. I think the government is also fairly cognizant of it, not just at the center, but also at the state level.
Right.
And even if you look at the subsidies, for instance, that the government is bringing in Karnataka, free buses and so on and so forth, in Delhi as well. I think those are measures, those are steps, and people can argue about whether subsidies are the right way or not. But I'm just saying that if you have to give a subsidy, then perhaps addressing and targeting women is a smarter choice to make. So,
Absolutely.
So I think we need to of course assess and evaluate the measures that have been taken by various governments and what they've actually resulted in on the ground. But I think there is a need to continue to have the conversation. I think there are companies that are putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah.
And I think there is a real appreciation of the fact that a more balanced workforce is good for the organization, is good is good business, as well. So I think that is something that we're starting to see, but of course we need to see a lot more of that.
I think enabling infrastructure is just, I think that's non-negotiable, right? Whether it is safe and affordable housing for women, safe and affordable childcare, washrooms where the jobs are. And I think government plays a big role in providing that. In our research, we found over 80% of women decline jobs due to either housing or mobility.
No, and it's real. I mean, ask me and my colleagues when we go out on shoots, for instance. We have excellent bladder control because you don't know when and where you're going to be able to access a public toilet that will be clean enough for you to be able to use. And these are not, these may sound like trivial things, but they're not. They're very real issues that need organizations as well as the government to think about and to address. So, very often we think that, oh, this is small stuff, but it's the small stuff that goes a long way in ensuring that women come on board, and more importantly, that women stay. Even if they come on board, they very often leave the workforce because childcare is a problem. It's expensive. If you don't have facilities within the organization, or you don't have a supportive organization, you're in trouble. You also have to recognize the reality of how we think as a society. The penalty, and I'm using that word very specifically, the penalty, it's almost like a penalty on women, because you're expected to take care of the house, you're also expected to take care of the kids, you're also expected to take care of aging parents, and so on and so forth. And that's just your societal obligation. And nobody tries to, sort of think through how you've got only 24 hours. How are you supposed to do all of this? How many balls are you supposed to juggle effectively all the time? And I think that's where leaders and organizations need to start thinking, because attrition can only be addressed by making changes within the organization, by also sensitizing, of course, people at home. But organizations have to step up. You can't just say, well, that's your problem, you deal with it. Because there's only so much that one person can do. So I think as a society, as organizations, we have to step up and say, what are the practical ways that we can address some of these challenges, which are real challenges? This is not imaginary stuff. This is everyday stuff that has to be addressed. How do we address this? In what way can we step up to recognize and handhold, and I think a large part of the attrition problem will be addressed if organizations start to think differently. Don't think of this as, again, going back to the earlier point of this as a privilege or a special benefit, but think of it as a need. It is a need. It is a necessity that you need to address. It's as simple as that.
And also listening deeply, right? A lot of the time decisions are made without even asking the person who the decision is going to impact.
Yeah.
You know, women returning back into the workforce, you just assume that we should give lighter workload.
Yes.
We should give simpler projects to them. You don't want to go out on the field. Women don't want to be in sales. Those are all very preconditioned assumptions that we are working off of. So I think the importance of listening cannot be overstated.
And which is why, as I said, you know, I fundamentally have an issue with hard coding a lot of this, because, you know, you cannot have a one size fits all approach, especially in a living, breathing organization, because your situation may be very different from mine. And I think organizations in the world that we live in today need to be much more flexible and need to be a lot more adaptable. To your point about listening, you know, I'm very proud of the fact that at CNBC TV 18, we've managed to retain all of the women who've gone on maternity leave, and they've all come back, and they've come back to the roles that they were doing and have been elevated and have moved on, you know, and gone on to take on much more responsibility, gone on to do bigger, better things than they were when they got pregnant and went on maternity leave. And the reason was that many of them said to me, some said, you know, we'd be happy to come back even sooner than 6 months. I said, that's your decision. You know, we're not asking you to come back, but if you want to, if you choose to, because you feel like you have a support system at home that you can rely on, that's your call. But stay engaged with them. You know, don't just say that, okay, and I'm not saying stay engaged with them from a point of view of, you know, oh, we need this from you at work and so on and so on, but stay engaged with them through that 6 month or whatever that time that they're off, to say, hey, how are you doing? Check in with them. How are you feeling about life? How are you dealing with this new sort of, you know, this new life that you have? And I think very often we stop treating people as human beings. You know, I think managers have to have conversations that go beyond the realm of this is what is required from a work point of view. You have to have conversations that help you connect with the other person as a human being. And it's not that hard to do. And I'm not saying you need to do, you know, 2 hours of this or whatever. But in the course of 6 months, can you not take out maybe 3 days, you know, and have that conversation over the course of 6 months to say, checking in with you and to see how you're feeling, and we're waiting to have you back, because people want to feel seen. People want to feel valued. People want to feel welcomed back. Not, you know, and I think that becomes a challenge as well, that what am I really going back to? If nobody really wants me, nobody really cares about me, then why should I make the trade-off of leaving my child and coming back to work? But if you feel wanted, if you feel valued, if you feel welcomed, and you feel appreciated, I think it's harder then to make that that choice of saying no to work and only yes to staying at home and being a full-time mom.
We were having this conversation in our team about housing for women. And we have a team in Lucknow, many women there. So they were talking about how difficult it was to find housing. Because they said when you go to a real estate agent, they typically have a scooter. And they'll say, okay, sit back, I'll show you the house. It's like, if it's a man, they'll sit back and go. But as a woman, you do not do that. That's the same thing that's coming across when, you know, Urban Company or Zomato are trying to train women to be drivers and delivery agents. There are no women trainers. They have to sit with the male trainer. There is challenges there. So there are all sorts of these simpler, not simpler, but on the ground, real challenges that need to be solved for, and listening, understanding what that is rather than assuming is extremely important.
Even in large cities today, if you're a single woman, try finding accommodation without having to go through a questionnaire, you know, with all kinds of rules being thrown at you. I mean, these are the practical realities. And, you know, I think the mistake very often that we make as organizations is to say, it's not my problem, you deal with it, because it is your problem. It is your problem, and you have to be part of the solution, or you have to at least attempt to be part of the solution. And to have an ostrich-like approach to say, oh, you know, this is not happening. I mean, these things are not actually happening. And I think that's why sometimes you're blocked, because there is no recognition of the problem. If you don't identify the problem, you don't recognize the problem, how are you going to even attempt to find a solution?
Absolutely.
So I think one, just an awareness that this is an issue that requires us to put our heads together and find ways of being able to deal with it. I think once you start to do that on more and more issues, we will find the breakthroughs and we will see the change happen. But that requires an awareness and a recognition to start with, and then a desire to want to do something about it.
And it's a long road. It
is a long road.
You know, because it's, you know, this challenge of women finding housing. When I was entering the workforce in '96, I think it was the same thing. And then my team and people in my team say it's still the same. Like, it is a long road for solving for these challenges. One of the things you touched upon, Shereen, is the new generation coming in and how the gender norms might shift with that. I was having a conversation with a young friend of mine, 24-year-old. She went to Stanford and then now doing her PhD at UC Berkeley. And she said to me, Auntie, you know, when I was in school, I felt like the world was a peaceful place. You know, we had all the opportunities, never ever even thought that gender would play a role. And then now suddenly it seems it's very stressful, because it suddenly seems like all the rules have changed suddenly. You know, you see wars everywhere. You know, there is question on why gender diversity and inclusion. You're beginning to think about that. How do you make sense of that? You know, this new generation has grown with this idea of equality, and you know, some of this kind of equal treatment of boys and girls, especially the girls have seen that, and now suddenly you're seeing some shifting sands. How do you make sense of it?
You know, I think what of course I do see is that young women today are a lot more confident. Are a lot more unapologetic for being who they are. And again, I don't want to generalize, but I'm, you know, at least, and not just in the cities, but I see this even, you know, in conversations that we've had with women coming in from tier 2 and tier 3 towns. I think what technology has done, it has in many ways given women who didn't have access to formal education, or who didn't have access to the kind of opportunities that you and me have been used to. At least it gave them a window into that world. And they became aware of the fact that there is a different world out there. Now, it's another matter, how do you access that? How do you find your way to that world? But there is a different world that is out there. But it's also, you know, Pooja, for all of the connection that we see in the online world, right? I mean, you're constantly connected. You're Instagramming, or you're TikToking, or you're Facebooking, or whatever the case, Snapchatting, or whatever. I mean, for all that online connection, it's also a generation that does feel lost in the offline world, because they're so used to dealing with the online world that they don't. And it's interesting, I had a conversation with a colleague from another organization, and she was talking about the fact that, look, you know, when we were growing up and we went through high school, you'll remember, you know, your farewell party was like the big thing. You waited all year long, you know, to get to your farewell. What are you going to wear? Where is the after party? And so on and so forth. And she said that, you know, her kid was so nervous about this, because, you know, high school for them was through the COVID period. So it was offline. And suddenly, you know, you had to deal with this online world of you know, farewell party, after party. And, you know, it was a sense of nervousness and apprehension, because you'd gotten so used to and accustomed to dealing with people on Zoom and so on and so forth, that you didn't quite know how to deal with them in the real world. And so I think this business and there's so much, I mean, without even realizing it, I mean, we did have peer pressure as well. But this is entirely different, right? Even unconsciously, you are feeling scrutinized, you're feeling judged, because if you're not part of the online world, if you're not Instagramming your life and all if it's a sort of glory, then you feel left behind. If you are doing it, that you feel judged. So it's not an easy place to be, and I think that's where I think it's very important for parents, for mentors, for to really add a sense of perspective. And I think that is the key, is to be able to be in that situation, but also be able to pull yourself out and observe things and not feel like you're constantly in the middle of something. I think what is happening today is there's this sense of being overwhelmed all the time, and rightly so. I mean, there's missiles going off in different parts of the world. There's, there is loss of life in the most brutal way. And it's not as if wars haven't happened before, but this is, wars that are being shown live on television, on Instagram, on social media, and I don't know whether young people today feel like they have the space to be able to have these conversations about what is going on in the world. And I think that even our generation, for instance, is dealing with it in the way that, okay, like, you've got to get on with it. But I think there are big shifts which are leading to anxiety. I mean, if you're graduating from college today and everyone's talking about AI and what AI is going to do, I mean, there is anxiety. What kind of jobs will you take on? Will you have a job to start with? What is your life going to look like? And I think because it's a period of great transformation, it's a period of great change, and the speed of change, I think that's important as well to take note of. And of course, every generation feels we had it harder, they have it easier, and so on and so forth. But again, I feel like that's the wrong conversation to have, because this is the world that we're living in. I mean, so how do we build a bridge to have dialogue and conversation, intergenerational conversation, without making it sound like we're dismissive of your fears and your concerns, or we don't acknowledge your world? I think we have to find ways of being able to bridge these worlds and have conversations where we can share our concerns as well, and they can share their anxieties and their hopes and their aspirations too. And I think that's an important aspect, not just for our homes and for society at large, but also for the workplace. Because if you're again coming into the workplace saying, oh, Gen Z is lazy, and as women we know, so much of the response that we've had to deal with is based on assumptions. Right? It's based on generalizations. And if we end up doing the same about the generational shift that's taking place, then I think that it will be a wasted opportunity. I think it is important for each one of us to really sit and try and understand the other's perspective. And I think we need to start to doing that in the workplace as well.
Absolutely. And I believe, Shereen, we are fortunate. We are in India right now. India is kind of in growth mode. We are seeing all of these opportunities that are kind of coming together through convergence of our demographic dividend, our economic growth, some of the kind of our digital public infrastructure. So there is still some positivity here where we're seeing this growth happen. As you look at, say, 2030, the next 4 to 5 years, what do you think will be very important to really move this needle? We are at 18% women in formal workforce over the last decade. What is it that that businesses, that leaders can do to really move this number up over the next 4 to 5 years?
I think one, of course, is going to be the jobs challenge in general, Pooja. Because, even as we talk about 2030 and we talk about our demographic advantage and demographic dividend, the fact of the matter is that, workforces are shrinking globally. And here in India, as we move to smarter and smarter automation, smarter factories without people, and so on and so forth. And the services sector as well, with AI and chatbots and so on and so forth. I think that is going to be a challenge, that what what will remain in terms of the current jobs and what will you add in terms of new jobs. And I do believe that we will see new jobs being added. I love the fact that today the most sort of visible example of job additions come, you talk to people and say, look, did you have influencers? A couple of years ago you didn't, but YouTube and social media created that economy. You now have an influencer economy. So similarly, AI will create its own economy. So while we have to believe in that, we also need to be ready for what that world is going to entail. What kind of skills are you going to need?
Right.
What do we need to do in terms of our education system? What do we need to do in terms of vocational skilling? I think all of those questions will need to be addressed by the government, by organizations, by educational institutions, and I'm not so sure that that's happening really at this point in time. One, of course, there is a challenge of people globally are trying to sort of figure out what this new playbook is going to be. What will the new normal be? And I think, no, there are no easy answers at this point in time. But I think we do need to start to recognize the fact that we do have a young population and find ways to address the jobs challenge. And really, as far as, getting more women on board, I think just, start, make it part of the culture of every organization to say that you need to have a balanced workforce. You need to have, you need at the selection process, you need to say that, look, if you only got 20 candidates and all are men applying, ask the HR people, did you not have any women? Did any women not apply? Did you even look for women for that position? I think start asking those questions. And that's really the only way that the needle is going to work. And I think reflect on what your practices are, what your processes are. Look at where you're seeing the attrition and try and understand why you're seeing the attrition. And this goes back to the cause and symptom. What is the symptom telling you? And then try and address the cause. And I think that is the process, that every organization will have to undertake for any meaningful change to happen.
Would it help for companies to have targets? Targets, no targets.
We've had this conversation, right? And I think companies feel that if you set a target, then you're obligated to deliver on it, and very often that may result in some sort of, opportunistic behavior. It may result in some short-term fixes. My point is that perhaps, again, don't hard code a target, but at least be mindful of the fact that see an improvement every year. At least make that a commitment.
Right.
If you're 5% today, do you want to go to 6%, go to 7%, but at least make that your aspiration, that year on year, I want a positive change.
Right.
And I'm all for incremental change, because I feel that in this quest for revolutionary change, we often don't move the needle at all.
Right.
And so I'm all for incremental change, and I'm saying make that your commitment. Commit yourself to saying year on year there will be improvement. And if we can get every organization to do that, just do that. That year on year, your picture needs to change for the better. There has to be an improvement. I think we will start to see material change.
If you were to revisit this conversation in 2030, what measurable shift would you hope for? And what would your one message be to the business leaders of the country, to the policymakers, to the women and to the men?
As far as women are concerned, and it was interesting, I was watching some coverage of the Oscars, and they were having a conversation around looks, and this is the red carpet look is a big thing.
Right.
And it was interesting and also sort of ironic that they were discussing the look as the trad wife look, and it got me to think, we are so quick to box women into stereotypes, to box women into labels, and we continue to do that. And we're now sort of glamorizing or romanticizing once again the idea of a trad wife. My hope is that in 2030 we will not feel the need to label women into boxes and stereotypes and roles. I mean, we're not trad husbands is not a thing. Part-time fathers is not a thing.
Right.
And so my hope is that we move away from this. It's interesting. Yesterday, the Crown Prince of Dubai, they've moved a proposal to say that housewives are now going to be called generation shapers.
Oh.
And that got me thinking as well. And I said, that's an interesting, because, we've so many women, I think, feel almost apologetic about saying that is the role that they play.
Right.
And again, this idea that you dismiss people if they choose not to work. We don't know why they choose not to work. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity. Maybe they made a choice not to work. But I think giving women the ability, the flexibility, and the respect to make the choices that they need to make without them having to feel apologetic for them. I think that, to my mind, will be the big shift in 2030. At least that's my hope, that if we move to that, where somebody can feel absolutely proud of saying, I've chosen to be a stay-at-home mom, and or not even have kids, but I've chosen not to work and focus on whatever else that I've chosen to focus on, without having to feel like you need to justify that or explain that. And similarly, I mean, for women, I'm very often, I know that women who are in leadership roles, etc., get asked, oh, but how do you manage your children, or do you even have children? I mean, again, you make these assumptions that somehow you've prioritized your career over everything else, and those are not the questions. Those are not the assumptions that you make with the men. So I think by 2030, if we can have less assumption and less judgment and less scrutiny of women, I'd be happier.
Wow. Such a powerful message, Shereen. Generation shapers and less assumption and less scrutiny and less fitting them into boxes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Shereen, thank you so much for this incredibly rich conversation. You've always used your voice for more than the story in front of you. You've used it to ask what's missing, who's missing, and why it matters. And today was no different. Thank you.
Pooja, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And I hope that, through the conversations that we are having today and the conversations that we continue to have, that we really provide that platform to other women to be able to carry this dialogue forward. And I'll leave you with an incident that happened about a year and a half ago. And this is, when Future Female Forward, I think it had finished its first year. And I was in a restaurant with my parents, and we'd finished lunch and we were leaving. And this girl walked up to me and she said, could I speak to you for a couple of minutes? And I said, I'm just leaving and I have my parents with me. And she said, it'll take 5 minutes. And I was like, okay, sure, go ahead. And she said, I am in a dilemma. And I said, what happened? So she said, I'm pregnant. And I've also been contemplating changing my job. And now I don't know what I should do. And I don't know her at all, but she felt that I was the only person that she could be able to access to have that conversation. And that to me was, I mean, it was a moment of gratitude to say, I'm being able to have this conversation with another human being. But it was also, mind-numbing that women don't feel like they have enough safe spaces to have these conversations about real dilemmas that they face. And so we spoke, and I don't know what finally happened or what choice she finally made, but I think she just needed someone to hear her out, to listen to her.
You made space for her.
And we spoke, and I wished her well. And I think that's really the hope with everything that we're doing, is that we hold up a mirror to women and to say, look, you can be what you want to be. We will try and be your we will try and be your support system if we can, and we will try and be an enabler if we can. We will try and be a facilitator if we can, and we'll try and be a friend if we can. And that really is my hope and my aspiration.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. And at Udaiti, that's what we are trying to do. Uh, we are trying to drive change through evidence, um, and sustained by conversations like these, because you, of course, are out there talking, but you don't know how many lives you're shifting just through that one conversation. So thank you so much, Shereen. This
Thank
was
you, Pooja.
lovely.
It was lovely to see you, and look forward to many more conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you. What runs through a lot of what you said is something that drives us at Udaiti and is close to our heart and work. India's economic growth cannot happen without us unlocking the participation of women in the formal workforce. Women across India work from early morning to late night in agricultural fields, as farmers, on construction sites as laborers, in homes as domestic help, in factories as contract laborers, and they get neither counted nor paid. It's time to change that. To everyone listening, this conversation is only useful if it travels. Share it with your teams, peers, friends. At Udaiti, we believe that change is built on evidence, driven by will, and sustained by conversations exactly like this one.